Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ice Time, where we dive into some big ideas around the NHL. I'm Mike Fink, and I'm joined by Blain Potvin, who had on earlier, talk about the Olympics, but another big topic in store with the Olympics in the rearview mirror and trade deadline this week. So, thought it, Blaine, have you back on. Blaine covers the Montreal Canadiens at the Hawk Riders and a whole bunch of other sites, including RG Media, Hockey News, all those places. About basically Montreal Canadiens everywhere, but knows a lot about the NHL as well. Blaine, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Enjoying a nice balmy winter holiday.
Yeah, it's one of those winter days where it's interesting because I was in Pennsylvania where it was 60 degrees at one point, and I was like, oh, maybe it's spring, maybe it's March, it's turning a corner, and come back here, it was cold again. So we're still in the middle of winter here, here here as well. So it's one of those times, but it's interesting because it is March now. Trade deadline's around the corner, and it's an interesting trade deadline. I think I want to start with this because I think it's an interesting trade deadline. Why do you think this trade deadline is going to be different than previous ones?
You think there's going to be more trades closer to the actual deadline as opposed to the last few years? Everything's been done a month in advance.
That's kind of interesting because we had the Quinn Hughes trade already. We had the Artemi Panarin trade already. We've got a lot of work done already. So I find that interesting that that we've had almost a few waves of trade deadlines. I think that's the uniqueness of this season because some teams wanted to get their work done before the Olympics, and then there are some teams that wanted to get it even done earlier, which is the case with the Quinn Hughes type of trade. But I think there's going to still be some moves going around. I've mentioned this definitely in the past on podcasts before. My thought is that this trade deadline is going to be your typical trade deadline where you're going to get those final minute trades. You're going to have a lot of movement this week, which I think is interesting about the trade deadline's been on Fridays recently. I think it's moved. They moved it actually to Fridays usually, and I think it's that week of the trade deadline, and that last day, that last Friday, just to cap off the weekend. I think what's interesting about this year's trade deadline, this is one of my theories, is that there's not a lot of big free agents available. There's like, a lot of the big free agents got signed already, are extended to long-term deals, and the if you want to get a star player, if you want to get an elite talent, the best way to do that now, probably one of the few ways to do that outside of drafting and developing one is with a big trade. So I wonder, are our teams going to look at this and say, okay, we might have to overpay at the trade deadline for that type of player just because we need to get these type of players on our team. We might it's the trade off, quite literally. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Um, I think the prices are going to be high as it is, um, mostly because there's not that many sellers. So the demand will be a little bit higher. But I think you're hitting the nail on the head when it comes to the rental market. I don't see a ton of work on the rental market, not because there's no decent rentals available. I just think that pretty much all the buyers want guys with term so they can set themselves up for one, two, even three runs.
And I think that was another interesting thought that I had, which is that we're going to see probably more, I mean, fewer rentals because there also aren't that many to go around, but players with term getting moved. And I think the extra layer to
Yeah.
this, and this is something you're going to get these players who have maybe 3 or 4 years left on a contract. Players with bad contracts might get moved. Players with contracts that you didn't think would get moved years ago. And my theory on this is that the cap is going up. It's a rising cap. Contracts become more affordable when the cap goes up. They become more affordable from both sides. Take Elias Pettersson, for example. Like, I don't know if he's getting traded. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, recording this Monday afternoon, by the time it's out, it could be that a trade has happened with him. But say Elias Pettersson's contract, which I believe has 5 years left on it. There's over 11 million of a cap hit. When the cap goes up, 11 million isn't as bad to take on for the buyer. And likewise, if the Canucks want to eat up some of that salary, it's not going to look as bad to do so in a few years when the cap is going up and the price for another for even like I know Elise Pettersson is not lived up to the contract, but say an
No.
elite top six center, that's the price for 11 million. Say the price in a few years is going to be 13, 14, or even 15 million for that type of player, or the player that Elise Pettersson's supposed to be. So 11 million's manageable for a lot of teams. That's my thought on that. So I wonder what you think of that.
Um, yeah, I think the rising cap is going to affect things. I don't think it's going to help those teams offload contracts as much as they would hope. Even though there's going to be more cap space to play with, the same teams that are taking these contracts on also have players on the roster that they are going to have to extend because of the additional cap. Most players go by percentage of cap when they sign their deals. So when it comes to comparisons, you know, for instance, Lane Hudson with the Canadians, when he signed, I had predicted a 9.3% just because that's what Fox and Hughes had signed for at about the same point in their careers. Now he took a little bit less than that, but 9.3% this season versus 9.3% 3 years down the line is a vastly different number. So, yes, 11 million doesn't necessarily hurt when you have more cap space, but you're going to have to spend more as well to keep what you already have. So, it's going to really depend on what is going back the other way. What contract are these teams giving up, and what's Vancouver willing to work with in that realm. I don't think it's going to help his overall value. Not that he won't get decent value if he is traded, but I see it more of because it's so complicated, something that gets done in the summer.
And I think what's interesting is this year's trade deadline. You mentioned some of the players, by the way, that have gotten extensions lately, and then there's some player teams that are on the rise that still have to address some contracts. You wonder how they're going to go about them and what they're how they're going to approach. You look at some of these players that are still on ELCs. For I mean, take the Sharks for example. With you've got Celebrini on ELC and Michael Neese, so you want to maybe take advantage of that at the same time. You know that you're going to have to pay those players down the road, and you don't know what that cap bit's going to be. It is interesting because some of the players that are mentioned this year at the trade deadline, the rumors are around Nazem Kadri, Steven Stamkos has been mentioned, Robert Thomas. These players have term attached to them. And it is interesting because I think that's you're kind of seeing that shift, knowing that there aren't a lot of UFAs. I mentioned a few centers in there. Stamkos now plays the wing, actually, so it's more of that. But he's a scorer, so that's really what you're targeting when you get him score for the playoffs. What position or target do you think the contenders are looking for this time around?
Oh man, center and right D-man. Those guys are worth their weight in gold. There's always a demand for top six centers. There's always a demand for two-way right-handed defensemen. If you can find one that's capable of playing on a top line or a top pair, well, you may as well just print money at that point because the return is going to be insane. Uh, I'm sure we'll get into it here in a bit, but Robert Thomas is in the rumor mill right now. That's a top line centerman. That's someone that the Blues would, I would assume, want an Eichel like return. And I would not be surprised to see that.
Maybe even more. I think about it, like within Eichel, because
Maybe.
he's because you're selling high. I think it's interesting. We forget with the Sabres that it was the injury, the surgery, all that stuff was up in the air, and he'd fallen out of favor with the team, and everybody knew it. With
Yeah.
Robert Thomas, it's more of he's they don't need to trade him yet. He's playing great, and it's interesting because also the reason I think that is higher now is because the only way to really get these players now is you can't just wait. You have to go out and get them. And I think that's why you maybe have to look at teams that have to throw in that extra pick or throw in that extra prospect to do it. And yeah, it's like top line centers, top pair two-way defensemen are part of it. I what I find interesting is I look at the contending teams, and I think the teams that have maybe are one piece away, and it's what do I think shutdown defenseman is the big thing I think about, which is you look at a team like the Oilers, who every year it seems like they target a shutdown defenseman or try to find their version of that. Or you look at the Panthers last year; they got Seth Jones. That was their version of a shutdown defenseman who happens to also add to the offense. But those type of stay at home options, and I think you look at whether it's Oliver Ekman Larson who could be available, maybe Brandon Carlo could be available. You look at some of these names that I mentioned two Maple Leafs there, so they probably will be available actually. But Justin Falk on the Blues, he's another defenseman that is a stay-at-home option. But for some of these teams that haven't have a talented roster, I wonder what you think. Is there a big market there, or is it's more of those names that we don't know about? That it's like, oh yeah, that guy's actually pretty good on the defensive end, and then we see it during the playoffs. What do you think about that?
Well, there's no names being bandied about out there really. I mean, other than Patrick Laine with the Canadians, of being totally 100% available, being shot. The rest of them, it's all varying degrees of, is he untouchable? Is he not untouchable? Or are they not even talking about that guy? So I don't expect to see any massive names, maybe one or two more, but my expectation is more those depth guys, those third line players, those third pairing defenders, the stay at home D man that'll, clear the front of your net, that'll punish you in the corners, um, to augment those more puck moving types. Because the contending teams, all of the contending teams, they all have a variant or two of a puck mover, but they have some deficiencies defensively. So they need somebody to kind of stick back and complement their play. And those are the kinds of players I think are going to be at a premium at the deadline here, like a Zach Whitecloud coming out of Calgary, for instance. He's got a couple years left on a deal. He's big. He's got a Stanley Cup to his name. He's got experience. So someone like that, I would not be surprised whatsoever if a first round pick goes towards Calgary for him.
Yeah, and you look at another big name is I know he's playing well now, so it's sell high is Rasmus Ristolainen. He's been in the trade
Yes.
mill and he played well in the Olympics as well. And it's interesting you're mentioning untouchables or certain players who are untouchable. I wonder where this is actually a side point is I wonder where teams will draw the line on this prospect is untouchable because I think to
Yeah.
get a big name, say Robert Thomas, let's just throw him out there if let's say Boston is targeting Robert Thomas or Montreal is targeting Robert Thomas, it's like you have your prospects who you'd be willing to trade, but are you going to trade your number one prospect? And for Robert Thomas, he might have to do it. So
Yeah.
I actually wonder where teams are. You look at Boston, for example, their top prospect's James Higgins. I assume he's untouchable. You never, but again, like maybe for this elite talent, you have to go out and you have to trade one of your top prospects. And with Montreal, they're in a situation where they have a lot of these prospects. Same with Washington, for example, Capitals. They have prospects on top of prospects. And if you're going to buy, you have to move away from some of them. So I wonder where teams will draw. One of the things I'll throw out there, one of the things I think might happen is you could see a team that throws out three or four of them for one player, but none of them are their top prospects. But I wonder what you see there with that in mind.
Well, if I'm the Blues, I'm holding out for the quality, not necessarily the quantity. So if it's Boston that wants Thomas, I'm asking for Higgins right away. And the decision there, whether you have him on an untouchable list or not, is, do I take Thomas now, who's 26 and will have 8 to 10 more good years left? Will he help my team to go from being a playoff team to a contender now? Whereas Haggins is more someone that'll take it is projected to be a player that can take them to a contender status, but 5 to 6 years down the line. Same with the Canadians. I'd be asking for Michael Hage immediately. Is he the guy to take you to where you need to go? Is Thomas the guy that'll take you to contender status right away? And you have to, there's a give and take there. because the Blues are going to want someone to replace Thomas down the line because it's an obvious rebuild move. You're not going to just give him away for, you know, uh, the big joke in Montreal is Halak, Ryder in a second. You know, this the old the old trade boards, HF trade boards offer for anything of any value. You can't just you have to give the quality. So the balance has to be there. Is this the guy that'll take you to where you need to go? If so, you pay the price.
I also like you mentioned that Trey that in Canadian for the Canadians, it's a classic fan sort of thing or a fan speak
Yeah.
thing. Is every trade hypothetical? They take all the prospects in their system that they don't like. They make it's like 5 for 1. We'll just give you all 5 of these players on our AHL team, and it's like, huh, sounds fair to me. For like their best player, and it's always how all these trades are. We're talking a lot about the
Yeah.
buyers now, and I think this is usually the way the trade deadline people talk about the deadline is they talk about it from the buyer side. This season actually is a little different, but I wonder. Let's put you kind of ignore the sellers, but which team? Because there's a few borderline teams. I think which
Mm-hmm.
borderline team do you think can benefit the most from selling? We already know our early suspects for selling. Vancouver Canucks, Calgary Flames, the New York Rangers. You look at those teams and you're like, you could say they're already selling. We already know they're selling. They've sold already. So you can already put them into that category. And the Blues are already a team that people have circled, are circling. So they're another one. But there's a few borderline teams out there, and I wonder which one. There's a fine line between okay, which one should sell, and then even they don't or whatever it is. But which one can really make up a lot of ground, or frankly do what the Islanders did, which is retool on the fly. Look at how well they've done, or look what even Boston did last season. Boston tore it down where they traded Carlo, Marchand. They traded pretty much everyone that they could, and now they're back at it. They're one of the playoff teams in the Eastern Conference. So, which borderline team can benefit the most from selling and set themselves up really well right away, pretty much?
There's a couple of teams like it. I know Winnipeg is way down in the standings, but I can see them seeing this as an aberration, a one-off. They're just, injuries. Everyone's having a kind of a down year because they won the President's Trophy last year. So, ride it out, take the high pick, and then move on. But a team like Florida, I think they can shed some salary this year, knowing that yeah, the playoffs they may not happen, and if they don't, whatever. We've got a couple of cups, and they still have their core once they all come back healthy. So you can shed some money, and then you can retool over the summer with some extra picks. I think that would benefit Florida. It would not benefit anybody in the Atlantic Division other than them, but such is life. The Devils, I think, are a team that could really, really strike it rich here because they're shopping Dougie Hamilton, or at least that's the rumor. Um, and they're having a down year. But Hamilton's worth something. A big right-handed defenseman like that, even though he's got a lot of money to his name, they can they can find a piece to fill a need somewhere, and then they can reattack the next season with that in place. Um, Toronto, there's a team that they need to do something. They can't. This is not a team that honestly they don't know what the hell they are. They don't know. Are we a fast team? Are we a checking team? Or what's our core? Like other than
I,
Austin Matthews, what
Bluntly,
is it?
that's their team right now. Their team right now is Austin Matthews, William Nylander, a young Matthew Nyes, and you don't know else is there. That's an interesting. What's interesting is that with the Maple Leafs, it's you as much as people want them to rebuild. I think a lot of fans now want them to rebuild because the core four
Yeah.
era it's over and it didn't work, and now it's okay. What do we do next? Do we tear it down and start all over? The problem is when you have Austin Matthews and William Nylander. I almost said Mitch Marner there, which tells you how used to we are with their core four. Tavares is no longer that player, even though he's having a good year. He's no longer part of your core. But you have Nylander and Matthews in their prime. You don't waste prime years, which they did this season. You don't want to do another. And it's interesting because they want to get those young 23, 24-year-old NHL caliber players, and they're not a lot of teams want to give them up. They're an interesting spot. The Devils were the team also that I had that I was thinking if they can really rebuild their prospect pool in one
Yeah.
season, and considering where they are, they might end up with a top five pick too. That really sets them up for a big upcoming season ahead. They can be in a very good spot. It is interesting, but yeah, like the Devils are one that I yeah, and the Maple Leafs are also where if they sell. I guess the question is, I'll ask you that. What's the question is, do they retool or do they rebuild now? Like what kind of trading do they do?
Oh, well, that's Brad Treliving is going to have to figure out what he wants to do, and he has to figure it out fast. Right now, I see him playing kind of patty cake with the idea. So they might decide to kind of retool right now or just sell off minor pieces. But this is something where they have to walk into the draft knowing what they're going to do. Is it a full teardown or not? And honestly, this experiment that they had there, it just didn't work. Although the hockey fan in me, having grown up, in a francophone community in Ontario, um, doesn't mind seeing this. But uh, trying to be, objective, I don't think it's a good idea. They need to rebuild. So tear it all down and start from scratch.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing is that I mean because then we start questioning whether you want to keep whether you can keep Nylander or who do you build around? I think and the same sort of issue the Rangers are having, which is all right if we really are rebuilding and tearing it down as much as they don't want to, who are we building around? What are the pieces that we can build around? Where you talk about in the Maple Leafs case, maybe you wonder is Austin Matthews he's not on a long term deal. You wonder is he part of the long term question? Ideally, he's the type of player you build around. So I would say
Yeah.
you want to find a way to extend him, take care of that. But Nylander, he's under a longer term deal, I believe. But other than that, yeah, you really if you're building just around them, that still is a rebuild. That's still a starting from scratch. And the Rangers are answering that too. And if it is a rebuild, where does Adam Fox fall into that whole thing? And what happens there? Maybe now is the time to trade Fox, interestingly, because he has more time on his deal. Where even let's say he's been out of the lineup late this season for most of the season with injury, and I don't think he's played lately. But a team can say if they get him, we can get him for a playoff run, and we can get him for a playoff run now and then a few years. So this is probably
Yeah.
his peak value. So maybe you want to trade him now. What's one surprise trade you could see happening this week?
Surprise trade. Oh,
Yeah, one player I would say you're like, okay, that was a crazy move. Like last year, Brad Marchand getting traded, I think that actually caught us a lot of us by surprise. Late in the late final hour at 3 p.m. Eastern time
yeah.
on Friday. So I wonder what trade would there's a few names that we kind of threw out there which would have sounded like surprises. Like Elias Pettersson would have been a surprise a few months ago, but now that everyone kind of seeing what Vancouver's doing, you could say okay, that's not going to be a surprise if he gets dealt. But I wonder, yeah, what's a player that I mean now you have to scratch your head and say okay, which players was I not thinking about or people not thinking about that they get traded and that's a surprise or that's a shock.
I don't know. I think maybe somebody out of Washington. Like they just suddenly decide, screw it, let's trade a big name and try and get a couple of really good pieces right now to give Ovechkin one last push to the playoffs because it's probably his last season in the NHL. They might want to give him a proper send off. I can see something like that as a dark horse kind of candidate for some kind of big name trade, but I would never count Vegas out. They're always in on something, and it's always huge.
They're the one that a lot of people actually now have linked to say if they're going to make a trade, classic, they would get Sergei Bobrovsky for a playoff run somehow. Find a way to do that,
Yeah.
and then everyone's going crazy. Like, how did they pull that off? The Capitals are interesting because I think they're actually the type of team that I could see getting a big name we didn't expect. Because when you look at, again, you look at the Capitals, they're in a similar situation to a lot of teams actually, where you have all these prospects in your system, prospects on top of prospects, as I like to say. You can pair a few together and trade them. You look at players like Hendrix Lapierre or these guys. Some of these guys have been mostly in Hershey with the AHL team, like Bogdan Trineyev uh, or Ilya Protas, Alexei Protas' brother. So I'm going to trade him per se, but say those type of players are there, and you look at a team like Toronto that they are selling that they could use those young players who can contribute next season. And it's interesting. And one name that I thought about just now is let's say the Capitals make a trade for young players, something Jim Rutherford likes his young players. Brock Besser. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I would not be surprised to see him move at all. That's somebody who's scored 40 goals in the past. He's under contract for a few more years. He's had a bit of a difficult time in Vancouver since they had that one really good year, and the whole team has just taken a nosedive, and obviously his numbers have suffered because of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if he'd welcome a change of scenery, maybe to a team like Colorado, be closer to where he grew up, something along those lines. You get him somewhere close to where he grew up, and watch his numbers explode.
He actually grew up in Minnesota, so maybe that would be the thing is they have wingers. They need a center. So ironically,
Yeah, exactly.
that one doesn't work as well, and it wouldn't be as big a fit. But you mentioned Colorado, and I actually thought that's another layer to this. I wonder if maybe they get the player who they do the Ray Borick type of trade, or if the team does a Ray Borick type of trade, which is you get that player who's retiring or has 1 or 2 years left. Someone like Drew Doughty all of a sudden comes to mind. Like, what if the Kings sold and Drew Doughty got traded where he could go, and he's a player who's a defenseman who's playoff proven, won 2 cups, really good shutdown option. We mentioned shutdown defenseman. Drew Doughty's that type of player. If this is his last year, I think he probably wants to retire a King, but maybe they like a team like the Avalanche or a team that you could even throw a team in the top of the Atlantic, maybe the Red Wings or the Canadians or the Tampa Bay Lightning team are at the top of the that they need defensemen. So if someone like Drew Doughty comes by, maybe I don't know Claude Giroux. If the Senators end up selling, they're in an interesting spot. Whether he wants to retire with a contender and he chooses where he can go, that's an interesting one. Another interesting type of trade I can see happening is the reclamation project, or the team that says we want to give a player who hasn't worked out in this system a chance, and we might overpay. You look at like Brandon Hagel with the Lightning, where they gave up 2 first-round picks, and it ends up working out because Hagel fits in their system. He fits well. 2 players, for example, like I'm fine with that in mind, are Shane Wright, who the Seattle Kraken took with the 4th overall pick in the 2022 draft. And many people actually thought Shane Wright was going to go 1. Hasn't worked out. And though you look at his career, but there's going to be a team that says we see the top 6 center in him, gives him a chance, and it ends up working out there. And speaking of center, I wonder if a team can maybe make a run at just Barry Kotkaniemi, maybe someone like that. And he's a surprise name also. If he gets traded because we haven't heard his name in a while, that would be an interesting one. Especially if we went to a contending team that said, "All right, we're putting him in our third line center role," and it ends up working out big. I'm just throwing a few names out there, but yeah, I wonder what you think about all that.
Well, with Kotkaniemi, I'd be surprised if he would fit in and become like a quality third line center because uh, in Raleigh, they desperately need a centerman. They need the depth. And somehow, after several years, he has still not carved out that niche for himself. I don't know if it's the style of play he doesn't fit with or what it is, but it just hasn't worked for him there. So maybe that change of scenery, could work. Uh, but whoever takes him on would probably take him on to fill that fourth line role first. Despite that massive cap hit, that's a lot of money for a fourth liner, but to give up this, they wouldn't have to give up a ton of assets if they were able to just take his contract. So I don't know. A team out west. I know the Kings are still in the mix in the playoff mix out there, and despite all the injuries, so there's some opportunity there. Um, San Jose is looking for some help. They'll want to. They got Smith, they got Misa, they've got Celebrini. They're not going to use all three as centers. So you bring Kotkaniemi in, he can fill in that bottom six and allow one of the three to move up into a top six role without having to rely on all three as centers. Something along those lines, I think could work.
I think in Kotkaniemi, I mean, we've kind of we've ignored or neglected his name for a while, but you hear this all the time, which is teams need centers. Teams want to get those centers, and you were looking for value. This is the type of player that you could buy low. You can buy it when their value is low and slide them. And Shane writes another one. Again, it's like you wonder. A team like the Wild. Wild needs centers. Do they do they take a risk at Kotkaniemi? Maybe they're probably looking for a bigger name out there, but that's a team. Even if the Florida Panthers, maybe if they go all in, or if they really want to push for a playoff spot, Kotkaniemi fits in there very well, I think, as a third line
He
center.
could, yeah.
And you wonder if that's a type of move. They don't have the Panthers do not have a lot of assets to move. They don't have the pieces. If you Kotkaniemi is the type of play, he's the type of player that you can get in there and it works out. And you're talking about reclamation projects. One name I forgot was Alexei Lafreniere, who if the Rangers are selling, that maybe they can get some value for him. Uh, if the Canadians got Lafreniere, what would your reaction be to that?
I'd be shocked. I would be honestly shocked. Yes, he's francophone. Yes, he was a highly touted prospect, but he is thoroughly disappointed so far in his career. And he doesn't bring anything that the Canadians don't already have. They've look at Zachary Budzik. Budzik's there already, and he brings pretty much what Lafreniere would bring. So there's no real need to go get him. It would just be for the sake of getting another big player and hope to God the reclamation works. Um, sure, the Canadians could use a guy to play in a top six role on the wing, and on paper it seems like it would work, but he doesn't play that style that they need. They need a guy who's big, fast, and physical who can shoot.
Uh,
He's he can shoot. He's big.
yeah.
About it.
No, it's not.
So
It's the disappointing thing. It's funny because every time his name was in trade rumors, the Canadians were the first team everyone thought about. And it is interesting because they're the type of team that the Canadians are the type of team that they've been their contention windows open now, and the question they have to answer. The Red Wings too, which is you're going to be in the playoffs, presume. I mean, the Red Wings, it's going to be their first time, but the Canadians made the playoffs last season. You have this young core that's on the rise. You look at Lane Hudson, Cole Caulfield, Uri Slavkovsky, Ivan Demidov. Those players are there, and they're only getting better. Their window's open now. And the Red Wings, it's similar, where Moritz Seider has emerged the top of the league defenseman, and your window's open now. The question is, how far do you go all in? Do you go all in? Maybe do you soft buy, like where you buy but you don't go crazy. It's interesting because your window's open now. How patient do you want to be? And it's an interesting dilemma because I think it can go either way with these teams. Whereas, all right, we can make these minor moves every year. We're never going to go all in on one year, but eventually you become the Carolina Hurricanes, actually, where you've been at this for a few years and you haven't won a cup, and the fans wonder, okay, when is that push for the cup going to happen? So it is fascinating. One team in limbo that I feel like actually we haven't talked about, but actually I'm fascinated. I wonder what you think about them. Buffalo Sabres. What do you think?
I think they're going to be holding pat. If anything, they'll now, I can see them make some space on the roster by getting rid of someone like a Jordan Greenway, who is disappointed in their system. I mean, he's a big, fast, physical type of player, like a bottom six power forward type, an energy guy that does have value for contending teams. So I can see him being moved out so they can bring something else in to help them take that push. Because right now, Buffalo's sitting second in the Atlantic. I don't think anybody, even in Buffalo, thought they would be where they're at right now. So to not go out and try and add, even though they have free agents that they're going to want to try and hold on to, show these guys that you're willing to take that step and go for it. Uh, they might stay. Like Alex Tuck, he would probably sign and stay with Buffalo if they showed a little bit of aggressive nature going out and getting stuff. With Detroit, that's a team that 100% for sure is going to have to go all in right now. They're looking for a center. They want to be a contending team. If there's a center like a Robert Thomas available, you spend everything you have to get a guy like that. So the motivation's there for those two teams. Although uh, I really would like to see Buffalo make the playoffs. I have kids who have never seen the Sabres in a playoff game. So it'd be nice for them to see it.
It's been 14 years. There's two layers to it, I think, in the same. Just I mean, because they have all the passive in it. Where can we trade Alex Tuck, who would be the most valuable player on the trade block in terms
Yeah.
of UFAs, that's for sure. Not players with term who we've kind of speculated about, but one of the UFAs who's got the most value, you could trade him and get a bunch of pieces back. At the same time, you're a team that has made the playoffs in 14 years. You're a team that this is your best chance to do that. And you have a chance to really set yourself up for a playoff run where I know it would be their first time in the playoffs, but you have all these pieces that give teams matchup problems, whether it's Paige Thompson, Rasmus Dahlin, all these players. Once you get in, you could be a menace. And on top of that, they have the prospects to move. And the question, I guess, for them is, okay, do you want to move that they're the type of team that do you see Consta Hellenius as untouchable? A great player in Rochester who's had flashes in Buffalo. So he's a player that teams see as a great winger. It's interesting because they're in that spot where they can go in multiple directions, and it is interesting because yeah, they're the type of team. It's interesting the Red Wings are the type of team too, where you wonder because they're where their farm system. Sebastian Costa, they have Sebastian Costa and Trey Augustine. Do you want to do you when you have two of those goaltenders in your pipeline? Do you want to trade one? A lot of teams that are rebuilding, interestingly, need goaltending. They want goaltending. It's a unique value that you have, and I wonder if you could see potentially a goaltender like him get moved. And Buffalo, same thing. Ironically, Devon Levi. They've got a goaltender.